So Blizzard has just dropped 8 more new hero talent trees, and one among those is the Scalecommander tree for Devastation Evoker. So this is our first look at a Devastation Evoker hero talent tree. So the specializations for this tree are Augmentation and Devastation, and Blizzard said Scalecommanders are the chosen generals of the Draktyr, specializing in calling targets and inspiring those around them. They are experts in using flight during battle and are often seen leading the charge while in the sky. So we're going to go over each one of these nodes individually, and then I'm going to give you my overall impression of the tree. At the very top, we have Mass Disintegrate. So for Devastation, this is going to make it so that all of our empowered spells make our Disintegrate cleave additional targets. And if we don't have additional targets, it's just going to empower that Disintegrate up to 50% increased, since it's 3 targets and we already have our main target. Now, before we move on to the additional talents here, I want to skip to the bottom because the bottom trait is super important and completely recontextualizes this entire tree. So, maneuverability. Now our deep breath can be steered in our desired direction, so we actually have control of our deep breath, and whenever we use deep breath, we're going to deal additional volcanic damage over 12 seconds. I think it's probably safe to assume that it'll probably just do the same damage as deep breath, so it'll probably just double that damage. But the important thing to note here is that we have control over deep breath, so it no longer would really make sense for there to be a reticle for this ability because you would just press it and then take control of your character. So I think more than likely what will happen, or at least my hope is, whenever you press this, you'll just fly into the air and you can just start steering your character. And if you press the button again, maybe you exit it, maybe you have to cancel it to get rid of it. But either way, getting control of deep breath is so huge for us because deep breath is really not a great button currently. Like the cooldown itself is really subpar. And the worst part is it's just very lethal. Like it's very easy to die in deep breath. This ability changes all that. It basically makes deep breath like a good ability again, assuming it works how I'm thinking it will. But this is important because you're going to notice a lot of these other traits in this tree have to deal with deep breath. And if this ability doesn't make deep breath good to press, if it's still really annoying to press like it is right now, that might just kill off this entire tree. But if it makes deep breath good, this tree is going to be insane. Going down from there, we have on the left side, the Might of the Black Dragonflight. This is going to be the most useless node in the entire tree for us because all it does is increase the damage of our deep breath. There are no other black spells for Devastation as of yet. Below that, we have Melt Armor. This is Deep Breath and Breath of Aeons cause enemies to take 20% increased damage from bombardments and essence abilities. You're probably wondering what bombardments are. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So moving down from there, we have Hardened Scales or Menacing Presence. The answer here is clear. If you're doing PvE, it's going to be Hardened Scales. That's just 5% more damage reduction on Obsidian Scales. Already a great damage reduction ability. This is just making it better. Although I do see Menacing Presence as a PvP option because if you knock enemies up, they're going to deal less damage to you. Also as Augmentation, just a side note, anytime you use Upheaval, this is also going to be active as long as the enemy was able to be knocked up into the air. Going down the middle, we have Bombardments. This was already mentioned on the left-hand side, but we don't really actually know much about this. But it says, Mass Disintegrate and Mass Eruption mark your primary target for destruction for the next 10 seconds. You and your allies are going to have a chance to trigger a bombardment whenever you attack this target, which will deal volcanic damage split amongst all nearby enemies. Again, we don't know what the proc rate is on this. We don't know if there's like some sort of ICD on it. It doesn't seem like there's a limit on how many allies this can hit since it just leaves it open-ended. So it could just be the entire raid is able to proc this as much as possible, or maybe there's some sort of internal cooldown that's shared between all of the different members there. But definitely interesting, and I expect the animation for this will probably be kind of like the current Helmet Chant, where you have the owl that explodes onto the target, but instead it'd probably be a Draktyr flying. Below that, we have Wing Leader. This is going to make it so bombardments reduce the cooldown of Deep Breath, Breath of Aeons by 1 second for each target shrub up to 3 seconds. So this is going to cap out at 3 targets. It basically means that every single time we proc our bombardment by using Mass Disintegrate, by getting our Empowered ability off, that is then going to give us cooldown reduction on Deep Breaths. Below that, we have Essence abilities, extend bombardments by 1 second, or we can choose Diverted Power here, which is going to give us an Essence Burst every single time we proc on bombardment. So this is actually really interesting because, again, we don't know what the proc rate is on bombardments. We don't know if this is going to have some sort of shared ICD. It could be that you're just flooded with Essence Bursts whenever you go this ability, but I tend to think that it's probably going to be a lesser proc rate. So the choice between these two is definitely going to depend on what bombardments actually fully entail. On the right-hand side, we have Onslaught at the top here, which is going to make us just get a free burnout every time we enter combat. Obviously, in Raid, this isn't very great because you're just going to get 1 extra Living Flame. That's going to be about a 0.2% damage increase. Not really relevant. But I will say it is nice because there's an issue that you'll find sometimes whenever you're raiding and you do the pull and you're in your Dragon Rage and you just don't get a burnout proc and you're almost up to your next Fire Breath and you still haven't gotten the burnout proc. It's really tilting when it happens. And this will just be a nice quality of life because you're always guaranteed to have that burnout proc. Also in Mythic Plus, this is going to be nuts because every single time you leave combat and re-enter combat, you just get a free burnout proc, right? That's great. Below that, we have Unrelenting Siege. So every second that we're in combat, we're going to get 1% more damage on Azure Strike and Living Flame. And that's going to cap out at 50 seconds at 50%. So we don't actually know how this is going to work whenever you exit combat. It could just clear the entire buff, or maybe it degrades over time. Hopefully that's the case. If this thing fully falls off whenever you exit combat, I could see cases where you'd probably want to do something strange to maybe stay in combat, to keep yourself in combat. But obviously, if we exit combat and we re-enter, we also get our free burnout proc. But yeah, definitely interesting here. Living Flame is actually a pretty significant damage driver, especially in single target. So this talent alone is probably going to be worth around 5% or more damage. And then in the AoE, obviously, Leaping Flames, it's going to buff all of your Living Flames. So that's going to be really nice to use. Below that, we have Nimble Flyer, which is going to make it so we take 10% less area damage whenever we have Hover Up. This is just 10% avoidance, basically. This is going to be essential on high keys. Very, very strong. And then we also have Tailwinds, which makes it so every single time we use Deep Breath, we're going to reset a cooldown of Hover. So we'll get a free Hover charge. In my opinion, it's probably going to be Tailwinds for easier content or Tailwinds for raid encounters that involve a lot of movement. Whereas you'll probably go Nimble Flyer for any sort of Mythic Plus keys where there's damage going out that you need to survive, which is every key, right? Let's be honest. But yeah, very strong talent right there. And then at the very bottom, we have maneuverability. Okay, so now that we've introduced every single one of these nodes, let's talk about them a little bit more in depth. So Mass Disintegrate is really awesome. My interpretation of this is it's probably just going to look like this, right? You're probably just going to have additional beams of Disintegrate whenever you use it. I'm definitely looking forward to this ability. Like, I think it would be really awesome to use this just aesthetically. It's going to look sick, but I think this is going to look so cool with these beams shooting out whenever we use our Disintegrates after every Empower. But what's actually really important to note about this ability is it will interact with our other talents more than likely. So every time we have Disintegrate tick, there are a whole lot of things that are going to happen. So the first thing to note with Mass Disintegrate, the idea of having our Disintegrate hit multiple targets, is that our Disintegrate ticks are actually going to give us increased cooldown reduction on our empowered spells. So if we look at causality right here, every single time it ticks, it's going to give us 0.5 seconds off of the empowered cast, both of those Fire Breath and Eternity Surge. So what this means is that if we use an empowered ability and then we use Disintegrate, that Disintegrate is then going to give us 3x that. So essentially we'd be getting 6 seconds off of our empowers, which in turn is going to give us more empowered spells, which more empowered spells means that we're going to get more Mass Disintegrates, which means we're going to get more causality, which means we're going to get more empowered spells. So you can see that there's like a loop here, right? It's going to give us a lot of value. And also those Disintegrates are obviously going to be doing a lot of damage to the additional targets. We're going to be just like Cleave Machine, but they're also going to have a chance to proc Scintillation. Scintillation has a 15% chance to proc every time Disintegrate ticks, a level 1 Eternity Surge at 50% power. So with Eternity Span, if we have more than one target and we're channeling our Disintegrate, hitting more than one enemy, that's going to make it so that we're able to proc these Scintillation procs, and they may even hit the main target. Like they might feed back into that main target doing damage. So obviously that's really, really strong too. But in addition to that, we also have other talents that kind of work with blue damage or Disintegrate. So the first one that comes to mind is Charge Blast. Your blue damage increases the damage of your next pyre by 5%. So if we're having a Disintegrate that goes out and hits 3 targets, that's 3 targets that are each going to tick 4 times. All 3 of those targets are going to have a chance to proc Scintillation. So on average, that means that one Disintegrate is going to be around 15 to 16 stacks of Charge Blast. So if we were to take this into Mythic Plus, you can kind of see how this is going to be crazy, right? Because it means that we're able to basically cap out our Charge Blast instantly without even needing to be lucky, really, right after empowered spells, and then follow it up with a really juiced up pyre with the Charge Blast here. And then obviously we also have Iridescence. Iridescence is going to make it so whenever we use an empowered spell, it's going to increase the damage of the next spell of the same color. So Obviously, if you're using Eternity Surge, that's going to make your next Disintegrate that's already being cleaved 3 times. It's going to make it 20% stronger. And also the pyres that you're throwing out with Charge Blasts that are getting basically double damage, those are also going to have increased damage from Iridescence. In addition to obviously Dragon Rage. Dragon Rage also gets increased damage with all 3 pyres. I could definitely see a world where in AoE, you just press Disintegrate always. Like, it just would be so beneficial to you to press that Disintegrate button because of all the cooldown reduction on your Empower spells, because of how much it's going to juice up your pyres. I really do think that in AoE and like Mythic Plus, we're just going to be vibing with Disintegrate, and honestly, that's really exciting. There are also some minor interactions too that I should mention. So obviously Catalyze is also going to be really great with this because it means that all 3 of our targets that we're cleaving are going to have increased Fire Breath damage. Unfortunately, we aren't going to get damage from increased burnouts just because burnout has an internal cooldown on like how fast it can proc. So probably won't get any extra casts of Living Flame there. But our Living Flame is going to be 50% stronger after about 50 seconds in combat. I think it's pretty likely with this talent build that we may actually pick up Lay Waste and Onyx Legacy simply because we have reduced cooldown on our Deep Breath, and our Deep Breath is making the target take 20% increased damage. There are other talents that we may pick up too, so just a couple ideas, right? This is obviously still very early, but Imminent Destruction. This talent gives us 10 seconds of reduced cost on our abilities after we use Deep Breath. If we're using Deep Breath every 40 seconds or so, I mean, this is going to be a pretty big deal, right? That means that basically every 10 seconds, 1/4 of our essence spenders are going to have that reduced cost, and that's just going to allow us to cast so many more of those abilities. But we may not even have time for this. I mean, if we're doing so many more Empowers because we have, shorter cooldown on it, if we're doing all these Disintegrates in AoE because it's definitely going to be worth it, if we're using Deep Breath so much more, there may not actually be action economy to do other stuff, right? It might be just really tight in terms of what we can do, but it's going to be jam-packed. This is definitely going to be really, really strong in AoE. Because remember, you can just mow down mobs as your Deep Breath, move around as you're doing that, and then immediately come out of it, throw out an Empower, AoE Disintegrate, have instantly full charges of Charge Blast, throw out a Pyre that's going to be insanely juiced up, throw out another Empowered spell, that'll give you Mass Disintegrate again, use your Mass Disintegrate, juice up another Pyre, throw another Pyre afterwards. I mean, this is just going to be crazy. And we don't even really know how Bombardments is going to work here either. This is just like the biggest question mark, but I assume it's going to do probably some decent damage. But the main reason we'll probably try to get Bombardments or hope for those procs is due to the cooldown reduction on Deep Breath. And it will be increased in AoE, right? So remember, at 3 targets, we get 3 seconds every single time it procs. I think that's going to probably add up pretty quickly. We definitely need to understand how Bombardment works and what the proc rate's going to be before we make too many assumptions here. But I think that this tree pretty much lives or dies by how maneuverability works. If Deep Breath really becomes an ability that we don't need a reticle for, if it just goes and we can cancel out of it at any time, that is going to be such a quality of life improvement for Devastation. And it's going to mean that we have just so much more damage at any given point, right? Because we're able to basically throw out this huge damage, Deep Breath. It's probably going to do twice as much damage as it does now. Plus, we'll maybe even have Lay Waste, so it might even do more. It's going to also potentially give us less essence cost. It's going to give us 20% damage increase on those targets for 12 seconds with our essence abilities. It's going to allow us to basically do a Mass Disintegrate that's just going to blast everything and then follow up with a double damage Pyre that's also going to do increased damage. I mean, the possibilities here are really awesome. And not to mention, it's going to look really cool. I mean, Mass Disintegrate is such an awesome idea. Another thing this tree is doing is it's giving us funnel. I mean, think about it, right? If we are hitting multiple targets with our Disintegrate, although the target that we're mainly hitting, it's going to do a 50% less damage on that Disintegrate, the additional 2 targets are going to give us more Scintillation procs. Those could potentially come back to the main target and cause more damage there through Eternity Surge, right? We're also getting the cooldown reduction on Causality, so that's just going to be more empowered abilities. Just doing some quick napkin math, it's probably going to be about a 5 to 8% increase whenever you use Disintegrate every single time if it's just pure single target. If you have no additional targets to hit, assuming that the buff stacks and assuming, the best case that it works the way we think it's going to work. But if you're hitting 3 targets, obviously you're not going to get that damage increase. But what you do get instead is you're going to get more Causality procs, which means you're going to get more empowered abilities, which again, like I mentioned before, it means you get more everything, right? Everything kind of feeds off Empower with this tree. So it just means more Mass Disintegrates. You're also going to be getting Scintillation procs. Those are going to be with Eternity Span. So those are going to be hitting the main target. So we just are cleaving more damage onto the main target. Just looking at Scintillation procs alone, we're probably looking at about a 6% increase in damage if both of the targets that we're scintillating are bouncing back to the main target. So with that part alone, we've almost counteracted the damage reduction that we would have with adding more targets, having our Disintegrate do less damage because we've increased the target count. So already we've matched that, right? And then if you add in Causality, this is effectively giving us Funnel. And not just more Funnel, it's giving us a ton more damage because we're also doing all of this Disintegrate damage to our additional targets, right? We're cleaving these targets for full damage on those Disintegrates. We're getting all those procs. We're also getting the Iridescence. And guess what? When you get more empowers during Dragon Rage, you get more Dragon Rage. So this potentially could just give us more Dragon Rage uptime too if we have additional targets to cleave. Devastation is going to be a cleave powerhouse. And it's also going to increase your damage on your primary target, which is like the perfect situation, right? Getting to do extra damage in cleave and also having that damage increase your target on your main target, having Funnel, as they call it, is a huge deal. And I could see Mass Disintegrate potentially even hitting targets that are far away from each other, assuming that they're in range of your Evoker, right? Assuming that they're within 25 yards. Because it doesn't necessarily state that the targets have to be near to each other. It just says that you're going to be doing damage to more than one target. I think we've seen in other examples of Mass Disintegrate that this thing will probably just fire off at anything that's in front of us if it has access to it. So, yeah. I think this talent tree absolutely has the potential to save Devastation Evoker. I think it has the ability to completely redeem Deep Breath in every way, assuming that it works the way I think it's going to work. Hopefully it does. And I'm just insanely hyped for this tree. In fact, I cannot wait to get my hands on this. To me, this is now the best hero tree that they've actually come out with. And it's funny because at first glance, it actually doesn't seem like that much. But once you start thinking about it a little bit more, that's when you start realizing all of these little interactions that it's going to have. And all the ways that it's going to make playing Devastation just so much more powerful. And it's going to lean into the niche that Devastation already has and just make it that much better at doing cleave, at doing burst AoE. I mean, man, this thing is going to be nuts. I really hope that they look into our Evoker threat, because if they don't look into our threat and we get this tree, we're going to be doing so much damage. We're going to be mowing targets down with our Deep Breaths every like 40 seconds, stunning the enemies too, right? Remember, Terror of the Skies is a really good stun. And if we have Deep Breath every like 40 seconds, we're just going to be able to stun every pack. We're going to be able to do our whole AoE rotation, essentially, on every single pack we come up on. It's going to be doing Mass Disintegrates. We're going to be Charge Blasting. We're going to be increasing all of the damage of our Essence abilities on it by 20%. I mean, yeah, it's going to be nuts. If they keep things the way they are and we actually have access to Mass Disintegrate with our Season 2 bonus in the pre-patch, this thing is going to cook. So anyways, I would love to hear what you think of this tree. Let me know if you're excited for Mass Disintegrate and having Deep Breath actually work. And if you like this video, as always, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.